Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to talk with people that I've connected with over the years in the music business, most of whom are all just a little bit more famous than I am. And today I am very pleased to have with me guitarist and musician, world musician extraordinaire, Ellen McIlwaine. Welcome to the show, Ellen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Before we get too much into it, I just want to say that I've had this conversation or talked about this topic with a lot of my guests about how there seem to be certain pockets of talent that people are involved in, and you have been a part of so many globally. It's just astounding. From what I understand, you were born in Tennessee and then at a very young age were moved with your family to Japan. Do you have any memories of the early years there?
Well, I was adopted by missionaries when I was 5 weeks old, so I don't remember too much about all that, but I had my second birthday on the boat on the way over to Japan, and we lived in Kobe for a long time in Japan, so I don't remember too much about that. I remember the voyage on the ocean,
Okay.
and Japanese is really my second mother tongue, I guess I should call it.
Cool. So how old were you when you moved back to the States?
Well, every 5 years, you had to go back to the States for about 6 months for your visa. You had to leave Japan and then go back. So when I was 7, I was in school in Georgia because that's where the mission based all the people it was the Southern Presbyterian Mission, and their place where they put the missionaries, the free place where we lived, was in Georgia, outside of Atlanta, in a place called Decatur. So when I was 7, I was there, and then again when I was like 12, I was there. Otherwise, I was in Japan the whole time.
Okay. You know, I first heard of you and saw you play, I believe, in somewhere in the mid-'70s, and I always assumed that you were primarily an electric guitarist, but you've got quite the background on acoustic guitar as well.
Well, I started on acoustic. I didn't start playing guitar. I started playing piano when I was 5, and I started playing guitar when I was 19. I was already back in the States, and I played acoustic probably until maybe around 1970, and I started playing electric. But I always had my acoustic plugged in, which is, of course, a big no-no in Greenwich Village remember when Bob Dylan went electric, so he did half of his show acoustic, and the electric half would get booed. It was that kind of time period.
Yeah, those were crazy times for sure. I mean, people are always reluctant to see change, but you've had a lot of them, and from what I understand, you, while you were in Greenwich Village, you opened for a lot of the blues greats and met people the likes of Richie Haven and Jimi Hendrix. Wow, that has to be a memorable experience for you.
Well, I stayed at a place across the hall from Richie Haven's. I played at a place called the Cafe Au Go-Go in 1966 for, I guess it would be, I was probably there for 6 months, and I opened every night of the week for $1.50 a night for various people, Richard Pryor, Muddy Waters, Junior Wells, and then Jimmy came to town with John Hammond as part of John Hammond's band and asked me if he could play on my sets when his gig was over. Everything then was a 6-nighter. You did 2 sets every night, and it was a 6-nighter. And so it was very difficult and very challenging, but I cut my teeth on that, and it really helped me. It made me better, a better player, and made me work really hard, but it was good for me.
Well, talk about going to school. You sure did. Wow. So I guess you released your first album with the band in 1968, and then you went solo in 1970?
I think it was about like that. In 68, the band was called Fear Itself. All the guys, I was the only woman around that was not a groupie at that point in New York area. And all the guys' bands were named things like Elephant's Memory and Cat Mother. And I was desperate to be taken seriously, and my band was named Fear Itself. Then we all moved to Woodstock. First, we lived in New York City for a little bit. Then we moved to Woodstock, New York. And then I started playing solo. And I think it was about 1970 they recorded Honky Tonk Angel, and the next album was We the People. And then I moved, then it gets all kind of blurred, but I went back to Atlanta, and then I went to, and I can't remember exactly, I think I went to Montreal and recorded the real Ellen McIlwaine.
Right, that would have been 1975. But before that, I understand that you were on a really pivotal album on Polydor, the guitar album, alongside Link Wray, Rory Gallagher, and Roy Buchanan. That had to be quite the honor.
Well, I think it was a compilation album of 2 or 3 cuts from all the guitar players that were on Polydor at the time. So they were cuts from already recorded on other albums, but from each player. And I was the only woman on there except for the woman who sang with Stone the Crows. And they told me they put Stone the Crows on there because their guitar player had been electrocuted on stage in England, and they felt really bad for them. And anyway, so they were on. I never met any of them. And I don't think I met any of the other players that were on there. But yes, to be on with Link Wray, John McLaughlin, Rory Gallagher, all those guitar players, and then little old me, that was quite an honor.
I'll bet. So you mentioned the real Ellen McIlwaine. That happened in 1975. And then in 1978, there was a release on United Artists where you didn't play guitar?
Yes, I was told that I was not going to be playing guitar, and they sort of tried to turn me into a pop-style person. I don't care for the album, but it was a well-done album. It didn't get very much airplay or anything. I don't know, it was very difficult. I also toured with that album, and there were a whole lot of circumstances over which I had no control, which really bothered me. But I don't think it's a bad album. I mean, I did the best I could with what they gave me to do, but it's not where my heart was.
Sometimes the machine just rolls on. I understand that shortly after that, you started touring with a power trio, and then you ultimately ended up with Jack Bruce.
Well, there was an opportunity to make an album in 1980, and everybody said, well, who do you want to play bass? And I said, Jack Bruce. And they said, well, if you can't get him, who do you want? And I said, I want Jack Bruce. And I contacted Pete Brown, who wrote all those lyrics. Pete Brown he just put out a book of his own of his beat poetry. They called him a beat poet, but he was a poetry writer, and he wrote all those lyrics on the solo albums that Jack Bruce did. And I just did a couple of those tunes, and so Pete Brown had contacted me, and we sort of knew each other. And then we contacted Pete Brown, and he said about Jack, he said, oh yeah, he knows who you are, he'll do it. And he did, and it was wonderful to work with such a hero of mine. He was a real hero.
No doubt. Before I get too carried away with all the albums, I want to just go back to the influences you had growing up. You were influenced by a wide variety of different ethnicities and different ethnic styles of music, and I think that had to be a big part of why your sound as a guitarist is so unique.
I think it probably is. I was influenced by world music before it was world music, before it was called world music anyway. But I went to a Canadian school, international school in Japan called Canadian Academy in Kobe, Japan. And we had, at that point, there were 200 students from kindergarten through grade 12, and we had 28 nationalities. And, like at family night and things, you got exposed to all different cultures. Plus, I grew up being the minority in a Japanese culture and being exposed to their music. And then also the Armed Forces radio was on. So I listened to things like the Grand Ole Opry. And my mother had a collection of classical music on LPs. And so all those things put together, some of the music, my geometry teacher was from India. So there was music from all over that sort of went into my head. And when I started playing guitar, it all sort of congealed into what, I don't know, because I play slide, that's different enough. Slide players are all different from each other, but if you throw in world influences, it becomes, I guess it just made its own category.
It's a venerable cornucopia of influences, that's for sure. It just kind of reminds me Some years ago, I did a radio interview around one of my own releases, and the DJ asked me, "Who are you influenced by?" And I thought, well, I've heard a lot of different artists. I said, I must have been influenced by everybody from Barbra Streisand to Frank Zappa. Now, I didn't have the same plethora of music around me, but it's just amazing how many things we absorb.
Yes, and it all goes in there.
Absolutely. So you toured Australia from 1980 roughly to 84?
A couple of times in there, yes. I think I went back one more time. Actually, there were 2 tours of Australia, and the second time I went, I also toured New Zealand. Or maybe I did 2 tours in Australia and then another tour of Australia with New Zealand. I think that's what it was. And that was in 2000, I think, somewhere in there. I don't know. I hope you have the dates.
It's I don't know that it's absolutely infinitely required that we have all the exact dates. I mean, and you've done so much in your, as I said, long and illustrious career that it's got to be hard to remember everything. At a certain point in time, you ended up moving to Toronto and then became a permanent resident of Canada.
I did. I was in Connecticut. And I got clean and sober in 1982 in Connecticut. And then I moved to Toronto in 85. And there's no place to park in Toronto, but I lived there 5 years anyway. And then I moved out to Calgary in between 92 and 93. And I've been out here ever since because I used to drive back and forth between Toronto and Vancouver and ended up playing in Calgary and met people that I still know today that are really my family, so to speak. And I guess that's really what I stayed in Calgary because it's sort of central to those basic points. I could drive to almost anywhere, so especially from Toronto and then again from Calgary. So I ended up here, and there used to be all across Canada, which helped me earn a living, a great living. There used to be 6-nighters all the way across Canada in blues clubs, and so they were all the way across. And what I did was pick up a rhythm section in each province. And there's a lot of really hot players out there that were dads. They were raising their kids, so they didn't go on the road, but they were available in town. I think they did that for a lot of blues players that came up from the States. And all I needed was a bassist and a drummer. And so I met a lot of really great players all the way across and ended up playing. I made quite a nice living playing those clubs while they were in existence.
I do remember those days. I started out pretty young playing full time, and they were all 6-night gigs. And then I took a break when I got married the first time. And was I ever disappointed when I got back into it that the industry had changed to the point it had? And you mentioned being able to pick up a rhythm section wherever you went. That's pretty cool. And I do have another friend, Bill Durst, who's a rock and blues guy and was the original lead guitar player for Thundermug, who to this day travels across the country and he picks up a different drummer, pretty well every town he goes in. And I wouldn't have that kind of patience, but wow, those are some experiences. So I understand in roughly 1997, you created a musical score for the play True Mummy, and that was drawing on Lebanese and Egyptian traditional dance music. Wow, that's something.
It was my Middle Eastern influences. The True Mummy was the play written about the mummies that were taken out of Egypt and taken to England. And then in order to, I don't know if they were burned or what it was that they did, but they got a glaze that they put over their paintings, the painters did. And it was called True Mummy because it was about that glaze. But it was really about a story about a person. It was a really interesting play, and it was performed. I think we did it every night for a week, and I was the live music part. Tried not to drown out everybody, but it was a really interesting play, and it was a real challenge for me. And I do everything by ear, so I didn't write down a score or anything, but I did end up one of my songs on my latest album, which was only 2006, but called Mystic Bridge, which I recorded with a tabla player, and his name is Cassius Khan. He's a great player, and he also sings ghazals. And he's the only person I ever saw, I think, that exists in the world they can play tabla and sing at the same time. But we did a couple of tunes on there. One of them that I wrote called Sittu, which means grandmother in Arabic, and it's full of scatting, but it's not really words. But I think that grew out of that play, the score that I wrote for that play.
Very nice. And then I understand it wasn't long after that you were featured in a Bravo documentary, A Slide Through Time.
Yes. It sort of took me up through, I don't know the time period exactly, but it's not. Now we're trying to raise funds to make another documentary, which would be more up to date about everything. So we're working on that. But
is that a crowdsource thing that you're doing?
I don't know exactly how we got. Yeah, I think they went to NPR, the latest thing. But we had a really funny experience, and I don't know if I should say this on the air, but I will. That HBO turned us down because they did not think the man who's going to do it, Alfonso Majorana, also worked on Rumble, Indians Who Rock the World. There's a new person working at HBO, and they believe that a man cannot do a documentary on a woman. And I think it's just totally out in left field to think that way. I mean, anyway, we'll see what happens. But I think lately they're going to NPR, and then there's also Hot Docs. And then if we had to, we'll do crowdsourcing or something like that. But we're very determined to get it done in the next couple of years anyway.
Nice. Well, if it gets down to crowdsourcing, you'll have to let me know, and we'll have to try and help you promote that.
Oh, thank you. I will do that. I'll take you up on that.
Absolutely. So, 1999, you played in the Women in Emotion Fest in Germany and produced a live album from that?
That's a label over in Germany, in Bremen, Germany. And so I recorded a live album. It was very rough. Someone called it gnarly because we didn't have a chance to rehearse at all. It was Leo Valvassori on bass and Randall Coriel on drums, and we just went for it. And we didn't have a chance to rehearse, so there's a few like flubs in there, but it's the raw essence of what we did. And then they took me again and into the studio. The same company, Women in Emotion, is out in Seattle, and this is after touring again in Germany. This time I used Taj Mahal's Rhythm Ambassadors, which was Kester Smith on drums and Bill Rich on bass. And the same group we recorded out in Seattle in a studio. And Taj Mahal also appeared on the album on a couple of cuts. And we sang together. And so that was recorded in, I think that was 2000. That was recorded. I stand by that album. I feel really good about that one because it was a studio album and we were rehearsed and everything was, we had more control. When you're live, you don't have a lot of control in the first place. And when you're live and you did not have the opportunity to rehearse, it's like a real, okay, let's see if we can get through the tune at this. If you all hit the same time, hit the same stoplights at the same time, it'll be okay.
Right, yeah. There is a big difference. But, you just reminded me of a quote from Roger Daltrey at one point in time. I read an interview where he said he would rather sing flat with emotion than to not have emotion in his singing. So I think there's a certain raw energy in a live performance that is really hard to replicate in studio, and yet rehearsal and being tight and going into the studio has its own magic.
Well, I think for us, we had toured together, so we were up on all the tunes. But anyway, what I do in the studio when I have control, and in this case we did it, we record the rhythm beds live and then overdub the vocals and the solos. So you still get that feeling of, it's off the cuff, spontaneous right there.
Well, I did that on my last recording project, and the bass player that I used actually suggested, he said, I want to feel my bass in my feet. And I said, that is such a novel idea. I don't even know when we were convinced to do this console recording, but why haven't we been doing this for so long? And I find that I haven't been able to match that feeling otherwise,
Well, some players like to play with the board, like they go into recording room and plug right into the board and play that way to get that feel. And some of us, I only use a headphone over one ear. I don't put it on both ears. I don't like this totally artificial feel. I like to feel the air move.
Absolutely. So then, I mean, you have done so many things and collaborated with so many interesting people, and I'm totally in awe of the fact that you actually toured with Taj Mahal. But not long after that, you collaborated with a Japanese electronica whiz. I'm not sure if I can pronounce his name properly, Shinichi Osawa.
Well, there was Mondo Grosso was the name of the group. They took me to New York, and we recorded. And then some DJs, it's real interesting. I did 2 tours in Japan with some DJs that had discovered my old recordings, the Polydor recordings, and they had used them in their shows. And so they brought me over to Japan, and I was the live section. The show didn't start till 11, and I think I went on at midnight or something and played an hour live, and then they went back to DJing. But the most fun I had was when they did their DJ thing, and then I played guitar over it, like electric guitar, soloing over the DJ stuff. It was really fun and very sort of explorational of new ways to play music. And I never got to further that. I wish that I had, and I have an opportunity. There's some people I know over in Nelson they're called Dose. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook and Messenger. And they do live shows right now. Everybody's shut down. But I would love to have the opportunity to do that with them. And we were thinking about doing it in July. We'll see what happens. But I would love to do something like that, to combine electronic music and live music and put them together. I think would be really, really the next step in all of this.
So this group is from Nelson, BC, and they're called Dose?
Yes, DOSE. And they are actually, that's Max Austin. He's my godson. I've known him since the day he was born. He's the reason I moved to Calgary, because I had a gig in Red Deer, and then I came back to Calgary the day he was born, and I held him and he pointed at me. And so I thought, that's it. I moved to Calgary from Toronto. That was a long time ago. But yeah, he does. Well, you'd have to check it out. It's very original, and he's trying to introduce it over there. He and his partner are trying to introduce electronic music, to the scene in Nelson, which is, of course, more organic and more folk-oriented and blues-oriented. But for me and for him, too, the perfect combination would be to put it all together,
So that sounds like an interesting project. That's something to look forward to. So how did you end up recording a live album in spite of having a throat infection at one point?
Oh, they flew me all the way to Japan. And, of course, when you're on the plane, the air is recycled, and somebody on the plane had some sort of a throat thing happening. And there was nothing we could do. It was all scheduled, and they had flown me all the way over there. And so we went ahead and recorded it. So I'm not at the top of my game. It's called Live at Yellow, and it was recorded at this club. So I did the best I could. So I have to apologize. It's not the best vocal quality, but most people didn't seem to notice.
It's funny, that reminds me of a time, and I know it's not all about me, but we have a few of these things in common, because I was in the studio back in 1983 and scheduled to sing a lead vocal, and I had tonsillitis. And it was for one song. I was required to be at the studio and to sing, and I don't know how I got through it, but the funny thing is, so many people said, "We've never heard you sing like that. That's amazing." Well, don't ask me to replicate it, whatever you do,
Yeah, right.
That's crazy. And then you went back to touring with your acoustic.
Well, I went out solo. It probably was financial, as well as I toured with Cassius Kahn, that I made that album with, the Mystic Bridge album. I toured with him, and that was my acoustic and his tabla playing, and we did several festivals and everything. And then I ended up probably everything. The internet started changing everything. You couldn't really drive all over the place and come home with any money. It happened to almost everybody who was doing that. And so probably by 2011, I had to come off the road, and I looked around and tried to find what I was going to do to pay the rent. And I ended up driving school bus, which has been I never thought I'd find something that I could do to earn money besides music. I never did music to earn money. Just it was a side effect. But when that stopped, I never thought I'd find something that I enjoyed almost as much as playing music. And driving school bus was just great for me. Because my life was obsessed by playing music all those years, I never had children or anything like that. And so I had a bus full of children, and we were like on a road tour until I dropped them off at whatever place they were going, either home or school. And it's been very gratifying. I've done it for about 8 years now to pay the rent. And I miss the kids during this shutdown. I really do. The last school I drove for was a girls' school, and I hope to go back in the fall and drive for them again and see how everybody's doing. But it's very gratifying. I recommend it highly. If you're looking for something to do, try being a school bus driver. First, you have to love children. And second, you have to try to be sort of patient. And it's really fun to drive a big honking vehicle like that. But otherwise, I really enjoy it. And I never thought I'd find something that I liked almost as much as playing music. But I did. I was lucky.
Well, that's a fascinating turn of events. But before you did that, I understand you, roughly 2008, you toured with Patty Larkin's La Guitarra ensemble in
Yes,
the
I
US.
forgot about that. Yes, she put the all-female group together, just a group of us. We didn't play together, but I think we all did the finale together, actually. But yeah, we were all very separate. There was Baji Assad from Brazil, and there was Patty Larkin, of course. And I can't remember if there were another couple of acts, but we all did our own thing, and then at the end we did a finale, I think. And they recorded an album of that, too.
Cool. And then you ended up touring with Sue Foley's Guitar Women?
Now, she did the same thing, too, up in Canada. She put a group of women together, and we went on the road. And I just can't tell you what it's like to be on the road. These women were much younger than me, Sue Foley's group. And I just can't tell you what it meant to be on a stage. And women it was so non-competitive. It was not, okay, let me shut you down. It was, wow, what have you got? Wow, look at that. Wow, look at this. And we all were like the mutual admiration society of each other. And we toured together. And to be on a stage like that, after all my years of being the only woman in the whole shebang for wherever I was at the time where I was there, when I was with all these younger women like that, it was just so inspirational. And I was so grateful that there were other women picking up a guitar and get really good at what they did with it. And it was quite the wonderful experience.
No doubt. And, I try to stay away from politics in this podcast because I'm doing this for fun and to celebrate people's music and their careers. But I have to tell you, I felt for a long time that women really should be running the world. My wife has ran in 2 elections, and I've stood behind her 1,000%. And, you started talking about the female camaraderie and how everybody complimented each other and, wow, look what you can do and so on. When I've been in bands with other guys on guitar, it seems like everybody's trying to show everybody else up. And why? I don't get it. I really don't. It shouldn't be, pardon my expression, it shouldn't be a pissing contest,
That's a good description. I just think, also, I don't think only women should run the world. I think men and women balance each other perfectly. But we live in a society which unfortunately doesn't allow that to happen. And I think that and you have to find men that can work with women and women that can work with men, because I've seen the opposite as well. When I first did women's festivals, I did the women's festival in Champaign, Illinois. I think it was back in the 70s. And the women who hired me got in trouble because I'm straight and they were all gay. This doesn't happen in the women's movement today to the extent that it did then. And they got in trouble, and I was hissed at by a lot of women in the audience. And then I was at the bottom line in New York City, and I shared the bill with Fanny, the all-women's group. And when they went on, nobody likes to follow me. They went on first, and when it was my turn to go on, they got up and walked out. To a woman, might I say. They got up and walked out on me. So But those things don't happen anymore, I have to say, about the women's movement. It's become much more open, wide open and tolerant of all kinds of women. And I think we're pulling it together. But I think now the example for me is that woman at HBO that says, well, we don't think a man can make a documentary about a woman. It's swinging in the other direction now. And I think women and men balance each other perfectly. And we need to learn to work together and integrate the great things that we both sides of, and everybody in between. Let's not leave out all the 900 other vestiges of human beings that are in between female and male. That if we can we need to be more inclusive of everyone, I think, and the diversity of humanity. I think we'll have a better world. I don't know how long it's going to take to happen, but I think what we're seeing on the tube today is an indication that things are changing in a better direction,
Perfect. And to be fair, I probably should have said we need more balance between the sexes. And you put it very, very eloquently, and I appreciate that. I understand in 2013 you were flown to Los Angeles to interview for a Jimi Hendrix documentary.
Yes, it's called Hear My Train A-Comin'. I was so flattered that they flew me there. They put me in a boutique hotel in North Hollywood, if you please. And and I was probably about 3 minutes of my dissertation was in the film, but it was so wonderful because Jimmy was such a big influence on me. He was like a big brother to me. He really was. We spent a lot of time hanging around at the Cafe Au Go-Go backstage for the couple of weeks that he was there and playing together and everything. Before we went to England, he introduced me to Chas Chandler, all those kinds of things. And he was like a big brother to me. He was a mentor. And I felt like he sort of reached out to me through the Hendrix Experience people. And it was a really wonderful thing to be included in that documentary. And I think they might have reshot some of it and left me out. I'm not sure. You'd have to check it out and see. But there's one version when I'm in it, and I think there's another version where they cleaned up some of the live performances. They became very erratic, the Jimi Hendrix Trio, or Experience as they were called, because they were on the road all the time. They never had any breaks. They were on the road all the time. And it became, you could tell it to me anyway, in the performances. And so they might have gone back, the family might have gone back and tried to clean some of that up and change things around a little bit. And you can't blame him for that, You want to present the best you got. And I'll always be grateful to him. I have to tell you the weirdest coincidences about that is that I got clean and sober on Jimi Hendrix's birthday, and I didn't realize that till about 3 years after I was clean and sober. And then I found out that he was buried on my birthday the first time before his stepsister moved into this big mausoleum. He was buried on my birthday, and I was raised in Japan, and his stepmother is Japanese. So there were all kinds of weird little, there's a book of weird coincidences somewhere in the universe. And those are some of the facts that'll be in it.
Kindred spirits. Wow. Yeah, wow. So I know that you've had all these different world music influences on your playing, and I don't want you to give away any secrets, but I understand that you use your own tuning when you're playing slide.
I'm like Joni Mitchell. I make up my own tunings. I just don't have 9 guitars. I only have one. So I narrowed it down to variations of D and variations of C.
Cool. And like I say, we don't necessarily need you to give away any secrets, but I just find that's very interesting. So do you often tune on the fly then? Do you change things up as you're playing, or?
Well, I ended up talking between tunes, and so, over the years, I have some funny stories to tell about things. So I don't know. I hope I can tell this story, but this is one of the stories I tell, and it always, of course, gets a big laugh. But I always say, well, I haven't been out on a date since 1978 because you had to wear a really short skirt, and you would stick to the booth when you stood up. Your skirt was so short, and you had to wear really uncomfortable footwear, and you had to eat in front of a total stranger while trying to appear attractive. And I just couldn't take the pressure, so I just slept with him.
That's awesome. Oh boy. I don't have too many more questions for you. However, I would like to let the people know if there's some place that they can get your music where you get paid.
I set up a website where you can download individually or by the album all of the material that I have, and it's ellenmcilwaine.net. But the first website that I've had where you can find everything, and there's a link to ellenmcilwaine.net from ellenmcilwaine.com, because on .com there's more photos, there's more biographical stuff, there's videos, there's everything, contact information. I used to try to give lessons on guitar, and what I do is too difficult and too individual. You know how slide players are so individualistic. So what I really do is take a couple of hours with somebody and show them all the different styles of slide playing. There's so many different ways to play slide guitar. What I do is very difficult unless you want to set up your guitar. Johnny Winter is the only one I know that had a guitar set up for slide and a guitar set up for conventional playing. And so I guess I fall more sort of into that school. I don't play conventional tunings at all. And everything I do, my action is like a quarter of an inch off the neck. So it's really a challenge to try to make chords in there. But I do that on a couple of tunes. And after that, everything is slide. And if I solo, it's always slide, no matter what tuning I'm in. But it's very difficult. I've only found one man and one woman that could do what I do. So I just really try to turn people on. I guess as a teacher, my job has been to open the door and say, see all that stuff out there? Well, go out there and get yours.
Right. So just to be clear, you should probably spell your name so that people can find you on the web.
Okay. So MC, that means I'm a Lowland Scot. Highland Scots are MAC. So I'm just MC, and then I'm IL, which both of those beginnings mean son of. So IL would be the Irish one. So MacIl, and then Wayne, W-A-I-N-E. So McIlwaine. It doesn't look like it sounds, it sounds more like mackerel or something, but it's MC, capital I-L, W-A-I-N-E. And one is .net and one is .com. And of course, the first name is Ellen.
Perfect.
E-L-L-E-N.
Perfect. So I don't have any more questions for you, but what I would like to do is to give you the last word if you have anything you'd like to say to the people.
Well, I guess because of everything that's going on, I'm very encouraged by all the protests that are happening right now. And I just am so proud of all those young people getting out there. And I share a lot of stuff on Facebook. I have one image that I got, which is a group of white women standing in a line all together, protecting all the black protesters behind them. I think this is a real way where black people and white people are getting together again, the way we should have been all along. And I just think the political situation in the States has really popped the boil and the pus is coming out. And when all the pus gets out, maybe we'll get better. We have to get all that out in the open and work on it and change a lot of the legislation that has been allowed to stagnate over the years, which doesn't support everyone in the system. I mean, if we're going to call ourselves a democracy, we need to be a democracy. And I think it's starting to happen. And I'm really so proud of all those people that are out there on the front lines protesting like that. And most of them are wearing masks and being careful with distancing and trying to be respectful of each other and take care of each other. And I'm proud of all the police that are taking a knee. Finally, Colin Kaepernick wins out. Finally.
Absolutely. That is wonderful. I'm really hoping and looking forward to a time when people like you and I can get together face to face and have a coffee. And hopefully we do, as you say, drain the pus and we have some positive change coming down the pipe.
I sure hope so. You know what I really think after this COVID shutdown business? People are going to rush out and hear live music. This is what I'm hoping. Everybody's going to rush and crowd all into the bars after we're all set up, or whatever venues we've got, theaters, festivals, everything. Everybody will show up because everybody's been sitting around in their house looking at screens for months, and once we can get out with each other, I think we're going to rush together and it's going to be great.
Let's hope we do.
That's what I'm hoping.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Ellen. And until next time, cheers.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, that certainly was a fun interview from me. Ellen McIlwaine is one accomplished musician, I have to say. And don't forget, you can buy her music legitimately and help her to pay the rent at ellenmcilwaine.net. Without any further ado, here is Ellen's version of Take Me to the River. Enjoy. Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including producing, editing, guest acquisition, etc. All rights reserved. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written and recorded by Tommy Solo with a little help from my friends in the night crew. And hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe? Until next time, cheers.